Dumelang Africa Amantle, and thank you so much for tuning in. This is Kitso ke Pheko. Please do remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please do like the videos and share them as much as you can. On this episode, I bring you my conversation with Rre Kgafela wa Magogodi, a cultural giant. For me, a language icon, a man of words who, with his theater style, breaks the norm and makes his own rules. He's a man of words through and through and a teacher at best. I met with him at the Tax Studio at the Transverke Creative Hub based on Constitution Hill in Braamfontein. And I began by asking him a question that's so short but oh so deep. Take a look at this.
Kimang, fantastic and complicated question. And I was going to say that this question depends on the room you walk into. But for the purposes maybe of this moment, kisi development of Siacha Satsuluha. There is a Tsuluha Mitiafana, Mitivide, Sabadi together, Kisida Samahadi Mante, Mahadi Mante, Aja Hadi, Memheditro, Eja de Sape Kota. So that's my spiritual biography. I'm speaking Yakamokhatla, because Kitso go Khatle, Bakhatla Ba Kgafela, Kibone, Abaring Paipo, Kabaraki City Velomano, Sasha Satsuluha, Marian Kitara Hape Kibamakit, my mother's side. Baha Hinyana Heya, Ekibane Baba Banzalang. So, Babatako Mahiki Kgafela. But there is a Hateli go Chudi. Go so now, he did a spiritual year. Then Harita contemporary introduction to spirituality. I'm an artist, right? I write spoken word. I write for the theater. I make music as well. And I'm also interested in reflections about the art we make, so which is a scholarship part. So I'm a scholar as well. I teach in the arts. I'm interested in writing essays about the things that we do as artists, right? The form, what it means. So basically theorizing and using an African lens. So yeah, there's so many things that I can say about who I am. But I think for now, this is who I am.
So as I know you, your work is grounded in the spoken word. How did you find your voice in this medium? It's a process finding a voice.
The things that I can, let's look back, maybe far back to my childhood. My grandfather was a spoken word artist, so he used to recite during family gatherings. And there's something about him that I never understood. Whenever he wrote, he would just grabbed me, to be honest, there. And I never understood why he left the others. And then something that I came to understand later. But then again, it used to bother me because I wanted to play. And he was causing me this botheration there. It was too much. Because you're a child, but things started getting, because as he wrote, he was used to recite. So then I picked up things that I think were special, because then, you can see the process, his writing, his erasing, his writing, something that became part of me. And then at high school, there was the first wave of breakdance, and I was interested, and I threw myself into that. So I used to breakdance. And then one day, and this was also the era where breakdance was just beginning and disco was in vogue. I had a friend of mine called Trevor, who was a champion disco king. So we both entered a competition, a dance competition.
When did it Trevor?
Yeah, Trevor and Shia. He won, better than say it's So I accepted that, but what's beautiful is that I came second position. So people were not familiar with breakdance, but they were fascinated. Then I won an album by Gary Beat, called the Gary Beat Experience. Gary Beat features Stevie Wonder there. So we used to rehearse, but then as you're rehearsing, you're hearing the lyrics, right? And then there goes Gary Beat. People of the world, wherever you be, welcome to Cosmic University, where life is a journey and life is a trip and a study of there to make you hear from the professor of the red pen. When I speak, I guarantee that my lines will not be weak. They say my mind is a terrible thing to waste. That's why I'm here and on the case, wrapping up every mind with a special degree in socio-psychology, GBE. The Gary Beat Experience is my course. When you take my class, you don't need the books. Cause you know the roots that the rap is from. When I speak to you, I am not down.
Stevie Wonder sings You Wear the Crown?
Yes, because that's the thing. It's the image is very clear. And I had to think about it. What does it mean to wear the crown? This is now apartheid South Africa. And here we are, looking at our surroundings, and it wasn't easy then. You're black, right? At the same time, I was hearing Imabele Madimana's Africa My Beginning. I didn't know who wrote it, but I think the situation was so tough there. Even stuff like that would be popular, because people would decide Africa My Beginning, Africa. You don't know who wrote it, but you are also the Africa My Ending. So these are things that I think for me begin to shape my understanding of who I am, because you respond to things that excites you. So I was excited about the way people put together words using rhythm and image, just the idea of sight and sound in words fascinated me a great deal. So I began there, but over time I realized that doing spoken word is a broader field. It's not poetry in the sense that, because I also embraced via Afrocentric schools, I come from FUBA, I come from the African Writers Association, so my lens is different. So when I speak of spoken word, as I've said, sight and sound, the the sound, this musicality of the word.
Pheko, you said that we blacks are cute, but where was Bantu going to? Why is it that us whose mother tongue is riot are not spoken to? Who will feed babies whose first language is spoken word? From the gut of the ghetto, one word calls another, and that's the spirit moving. But where is this song going to? Is it going to rub ambi lotion on the skin and burn it cause whiter than snow? It longs to be no more where Bantu. Will it live in gated rainbows? Cause Soweto is full of Batubabanto Barasa. It wants to eat kasi too. This line is a history test. Freedom is failing because we raise ugly people too.
Being a member of the African Writers Association as a young person really exposed me to a body of literature that, also assisted me to think through myself as not just South African, but continent, as a person in the continent, through the literature of Aigweyama, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Chinua Achebe, and so many others were, and I think at the time the voices that we valued at the time. So the African Writers Association had a library, so they helped us with those books, African literature series. So that opened up my search quite strongly, because I was beginning to be exposed to even very, very, very heightened conversations about the continent and issues around coloniality that now seeing a young guy in South Africa having to deal with this apartheid regime and having to grow up in a world that sort of wants to, if you like, reduce me to, to the tiniest thing. But, there are voices that I'm imbibing now that are opening up a different spirits. So you come from this small and you become larger because of the voices that you are receiving, whether through books or through training by others, like people that I meet, like Don Matera, when I was I think around 18 at FUBA. My principal was Pamela at the time, so I felt lucky because I was surrounded by people who were really active and they found their voices. So when I began to write, it was this tradition of black consciousness that inspired me quite a lot. So my voice is a product also of something larger than me, a struggle that we are still fighting today, because there's still a lot that needs to be done to liberate us, to liberate this country. When I go to work, I pass through a soup kitchen, and these are black people. These are the owners of the land, and it's bothers me because the soup kitchen is here in my office. It's here, so I cannot ignore that. So that's why I'm saying there's still work that needs to be done to understand that, there's land that we still need to fight for. So in that way, then the voice continues to speak outside the containers that ordinarily would be given, because we're supposed to be in a world that is free, if you like. But as you walk in the streets, the optics deny.
Yes, they deny.
Yeah, the voice from above, they're telling, but there are things to be done. So my voice comes from that, influences by greater people than I, and also just the experience of being a black South African with many sometimes exciting, often horrendous experiences that I've had to fight through to be able to stand here.
Yeah. Language.
Yes.
When does Setswana come into the picture and become your language of choice of expression?
Ke magogodi ke a gogola ke no ke kgolo ke thotobolo ya selo ke Kgafela wa ga makgetla ga kgetla ga kgetlo Kgafela wa ga makgetla phetlo a tabane wa ga tshegetsang ke ataretse maropeng ke reditse ke magogodi ke a gogola ke no ke kgolo ke thotobolo ya selo go le ban wa ga ntiretso khomanyane wa ga pudumo a khutwa mokwena wa ga sethunyane nageng se ikitsha dithunya se sa tsuntse le role ke magogodi ke a gogola ke no ke kgolo ke thotobolo ya selo ke re seng khotle ke kgabo ya molelo kgabo ya morula khote kgolo a ba khatla ke magogodi ke a gogola ke no ke kgolo ke thotobolo ya selo ke Kgafela.
And now I have to explain also things. Maybe I grew up in Midlands, so 9, so 8, and and then I also grew up Komafike, so in that sense, Kadi holiday, Kajuni, Yamafike, December, because that's where my parents come from. Right? So then I then had this flavor, the village. I could pick up things, stories, and rhythms of the language, Setswana, apparently pure, but I will come back to the purity of it because I don't believe there's a pure language. So, and then they go you grow up, go Midlands, so 9 is supposed to be area of Botswana. And as you know, the apartheid in Esplanade, so 80 would be Matsonga, and then Zone 10 Zulu people, and so forth and so forth. So you grow up also mixing things because my neighbor, even if we're in the Tswana or Setswana area,
Exposure to
and so that thing was the timer. So all these languages are available. So I grew up, I get my figure, and there's a much more, it's all our tradition. So then I could express myself in both scenarios. But then I grew up, and as I've said, we grow up with these expressions, and then as I'm growing up, the Black consciousness tradition draws me. But now what disturbs me, it's almost as if it's to belong to that club, BC or what. Because a lot of the expressions they we picked up things like Africa my beginning, Africa my ending. This was a poetry that was in the tradition, Black consciousness, and then there were writings that accompanied that. So the Grootman had the approach, and it's all the delicious and
And can I interrupt you? I'm sure also some of it is to show off the English.
Yeah, most of it. It was about the powers of erudition and, being able to handle the language as a power with finesse and all. And these are the kind of Grootman is taking it. I was exposed to them as a state. But they were quite hip in that, over and above that, there was something that they were sharing. So I grew up watching this thing and I remember when I started writing, and then he saw that he gives me a Shakespeare thing. So you can see Sephora was supposedly a language, poetry, the language of theater. And this is the kind of thinking that was inculcated at the time, but then fine. At the beginning, I'm seduced by this idea. Because processing blind, and then we start writing all these little poems, but then, yes, I mean, I succeeded to some extent, but I wasn't connecting in the way that, I wanted to connect with the
What do you mean by that? Not connecting the way you want to connect.
There's certain things about the rhythm and fluidity that comes with language, because you connect spiritually to certain things because, the language allows you, So one day, for me, just as personal experience, going to Grahamstown, and I realized the extent to which, this was also a problem, in that it's almost there's a tradition that you must bow to, and it's controlled by this English thing, and it's supposed to be South African poetry, South African theatre, and every year people go to Grahamstown to bow before the English and show them that they can speak right and good English. And I went once and I never went back.
Why?
No, honestly, people go to Grahamstown for that particular event, their poetry, because I was really disturbed, because I could see the coloniality of it all.
Wow.
Because you have to present.
What is this?
I think.
Where are you when I'm going to finish half of the stage?
No, at the time I was, I think, completing my MA and then trying to get into the writing scene, but then I get invited there, and I see this thing playing out where you must present this work to people who will be looking at whether they can give you permission to become a poet. And I thought, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to do this nonsense. So I thought, I'm not going to write as poem. Okay, because even I don't want to have a conversation with these people. But at the time also there was an influence. Nguk is decolonizing the mind, because I was also a student of African literature. And there's a conversation that he has around the language of African literature, and he talks about how in 1962 in Kampala there was a conference here, African writers in English expression, or African writers of English expression. I think that was the day, 1962 in Kampala, right? So here he is as a young person, and he's written 2 short stories. He's not established as a writer. And he's invited to this conference where he was going to meet Chinua Achebe. So it was a big thing for him. But he never thought deeply about the question of language. But he says 17 years later he started reflecting, and this reflection are also inspired by something that was written a year after the 1962 conference, right? By I think the guys Obi-Wali or something like that, who critiques the conference to say, what is this African literature, right, that is written in English, right?
So bad in question.
Yeah. So then I think in the end he declares that it must be written in African languages. So this is 1963, right? So Ngugi stays with this thing, and he begins to reflect now on his own practice. He says, but I was invited to this conference, and I'd only written 2 short stories. And here there's a whole body of writers in African languages that are not invited. So what does it mean? Are we elevating this language? So, and then that made me think, what is it that we are doing now? We are saying we are writers in Africa, or we are African writers. What is the difference there? So he then speaks about, for instance, instances where, and this is everywhere. I mean, in the continent, we begin to develop an attitude where we think the greatest way to express ourselves, thought has to be handled. Kamuzu Banda has this academy where he wants to teach, rightfully so, it's people to work all over the world and send them to universities. But his strategy is that English must be pure, it must be taught in its purest sense. And then he doesn't want Malawians to be part of this. He invites teachers from Britain to come and teach.
Direct English.
Yeah, because these natives were spoiled this thing of English. So he was very clear. So, and this is the kind of thing that we grow up in. Now saying my father himself presents a Shakespeare book to me. So we grow up with the idea that, English is the language of thought, English is the language of poetic expression, and so forth, and so forth. We go to Senegal, you have people like, not just English, really even French. Because when you think about it, in the continent, we define ourselves according to, the colonial masters, what became, parceled out in the Berlin Conference in 1884, because we speak of ourselves outside the continent as French-speaking African, English-speaking or Anglophone or Lusophone, Portuguese-speaking. So all these things tell us that, we are defining ourselves in the terms that, are determined by the settlers. So in Senegal, a guy like Senghor, whom we praise as a great poet, was really complicated because he was also wanting to be assimilated to the French traditions that he thought were greater than his own African traditions, in spite of his magnitude and so forth. He was a very complicated person in that he thought, French was the most beautiful language ever. It brought freshness to the spaces. And then Osman, in a movie or film called Khala, and also a novel, critiques what's his name, Senghor, when he gives you this character El Haji is in trouble after stealing money and so forth, and then he tries to defend himself in this chamber of commerce, using Wolof and Swan, that, even the insult must be conducted in the purest French tradition. So this is the world that I grew up in, right? So where the languages of the settlers have been elevated.
Glorified.
Yeah, they're glorified even, in the space that I work in. Now, there's a challenge because we must teach Kasehowa and so forth, even if the subject matter as a whole. You see, so we still having to have that fight. So when I started writing the words around it was a response to this world, because I thought about the question also that Ngugi asks in that decolonizing the mind. When do we, I'm rephrasing the question, but it's about when do we start creating literary monuments in our languages? Because what we have done is, we've seen people like Achebe would argue differently that, you can reflect this English with your own rhythms and so forth. Yes, it's interesting, that argument, but Ngugi argues that, look, we are reading our own languages and then we are enriching the stores of foreign languages. So when do we create in our own language? So that sat with me for a long time, and that's when we started our experiment languages are on. So, and then you are facing a situation and then your Setswana is not pure now. And then now you try to get back to that. And at the beginning of my journey, I was searching for this thing, but I realized also over time that it's futile, because there's no pure language. Right? think about it, languages, they evolve over time. Like we can start from the beginnings of maybe humanity and how maybe if we take the argument, let's say humanity begins in the continent. Let's loosely go with the argument that, with the story that it begins here in Kalafadi, Gotsodilo in Botswana, and then where people spoke languages, and you find the story when you read Indaba, My Children, although I'm reinterpreting based on other sources as well. So that you find that there were languages that were spoken there that came to us, as Setswana, Sevenda, but this in the morning of time. But these languages kept changing as people, kept fighting. And, for instance, Botswana, Barolo when they had a battle with within themselves, and then a group that went to Damu became Bachabi, that kind of thing. But then along the way, they made Magogodi, and so they needed to also adapt, and then the language also adapt. So language is like that. It's always changing, and it's never pure at any time. So that's why when people speak about purity of language, they surprise me, because it is dishonest to speak about. But we still have people who think like that. No, so and so speaks pure Tswana. There's no such thing. I mean, you go to Tswana, but we're different, and then you cross the border. Tswana is different. You go to Rustenburg, and I'm sure you can talk. Yeah. So for me, it's that. But also when you think about the history as well now, particularly how it enters the scribal traditions, right? Because before the colonial encounter, it was an oral expression, right? It wasn't really written. Yeah, but now the first 100 years of orthography is in the hands of the missionaries. Robert Moffat. In fact, Saul Blackie complains in 1916 about how the school system has murdered, he uses those words, the languages, our African language, because these languages now are taught by people who don't speak them naturally with a different accent and also, syntax, rhythm are not the same. So then they're taught in a particular way that separates them from their origins. And this is what Saul Black is arguing in 1916 to say, but let's look at this thing, it's a problem. But then this is the foundation of so-called pure Setswana that came through the schooling system over time, because then whatever was developed on that foundation. So how do I even trust this language? Because when I was growing up, I thought this is pure, but then over time, and this was my challenge as I'm writing also my work, as whether in plays or spoken word or music, was what is the actual thing? And then I grew up speaking Ringans, or Sprakati, I prefer to call it Sprakati, Bamamba is Chuchu, and so forth. And then it comes naturally to me. And I thought maybe also this is where also we need to think, because how do we express ourselves outside languages that are not readily available to the public, because we are looking for something pure. And then I thought about models like Pidgin English that are used by Bofela Kuti and all these, and that are much more open, but colloquials generally do that, right? And now at the moment I'm experimenting with a language I would safely call Sprakati, so that I have in my plays had these characters who speak basically the language that I speak naturally, as I said, that it's the language of the street and so forth. There is an interesting essay in a book called Reconstruction by Buntu Fenyana. He talks, I think the essay, the book was edited by Mutoni Mutwatsi. Find that book. Contains a whole number of things and essays. Buntu Fenyana writes about Islam today. And he writes sections of the essay Castamto. Very interesting. I'd like to emulate that one day. So my experiment comes from these influences. So when I'm now writing a short, I'm writing a play based on a fable, the Akulu di Nonyani, or the tortoise and the bear. So I've invented a storyteller there called Budiatsela, the goat of the road. But now Budiatsela, Ushapas Tuncho. So because also it's about experimenting and speaking a language that is now and alive. Because we've heard that storyteller, why Kwasuga Sugela, we've been there. And I'm not denying that experience, but I'm working with that the structures in this play, but I'm trying to get this guy to speak a language that we speak, right? But he's telling this story. But he's not moving into anything that is pure. And for me, that is very important, because how do we connect? When I was doing my play, Chidai, I planted it in the streets, Zabramfontein, and my main character speak. So it was interesting for me to see how this language is automatically understood, because then here I am. I had to play Pheko Street. I actually created a stage and setting outside this building, and then we had people, coming to. And it was interesting to see, because then the play was not closed. It wasn't intellectual, because then it's the language that people could really respond to. So for me, those experiments are very important, because partly why I make art is about our community, and the important messages regarding this are because of our Shapa dangerous, and I think sometimes they are really need that because I think it's a futile exercise, but that's not my choice, that's other people's choices, so they can do that if they want to. So this is where I began with language, because all these things are playing in my head, all these debates that began, as I said, a long time ago, that precede me, are still part of why I exist today. They inform the work that I think I need to do, because we don't just begin without a foundation. So there is a foundation. People began discussing these things long ago. So I'm only also adding my voice, and I'm not claiming that this is the last word of knowledge and so forth. But where I stand now, I think it's important to experiment more with language and then maybe shy away from notions of purity, because then they can also slow you down. Yeah, so at the moment, I experiment, but as I've said, Sprakati, Senali syntax, the African language. So it's a base, but the language can take everything. So it changes over time, but then it's a language that keeps changing. So you can actually utilize every word that you see, but you have a base from which you are speaking. So I've abandoned this idea of purity, mother tongue, and so forth. But also, with writing, it depends on what you're writing. When I write plays, for instance, I write to character, to space. Right? If I find my character in Soweto, if they're in Middlelands, so 9, I will locate them with that language, so that I'm not necessarily writing a language that is outside the space. So to catch that context,
naga ke rona ntshotsa ga nna le wena re goga mogaga re a tlhanoga re re ai bowe fa naga ke rona ntshotsa ga nna le wena re goga mogaga re a tlhanoga re re ai bowe fa naga e thaile ya go kgarakgatsega ga se go rogatsela go retologa ke re ga se go rogatsela go retologa re gwanta re gata mmogo re ikgoga dikgato re tsapoga re gwanta re le botsoga tsoga e bata masojanaga re ganne phakela go phimoga ra masigo le dikgaga re shebelana go fatloga re thomolana divaga bikintsho tsa ga nna le wena re a nanoga phefo difoka re menoga ke re phefo difoka re menoga le naga re belega re tshegetsa re katoga re sa bolo go thatoga re fologa ra goroga tsatsi le ra goga maru a poga e ikala naga le rumo la romega ba boa ba kgokologa bokgodumodumo ba thubega dimpa ba tlhobega diphuka mekrenko ya robega megata ya kgaoga ba lala ba re pagologa aga ba tsatsaraga ba jagantwa diaga di bataga getagtetsa buremaga maragaraga di botlola mafiega bo freedom tomorrow lo a diega ke re bo sarafina ba stadaga re re ai bowe fa naga.
In closing, what do you say to a young black South African who ignores everything about themselves to adapt to the notion of a global citizen?
Yeah, I give it, the globe is everywhere. We are universal in the sense that we are part of a greater world, right? So whoever is in Britain, when they come here, by Urgante.
Yes. Yes.
They always talk about going overseas. That is a Urgante. Yeah. So maybe just as a, but also I think that's a light way of putting it. But it's important to have self-respect. And that's where it begins, right? And to respect. But because and for me gratitude, it's important to the self, and once you are happy with who you are, it opens up a lot of things, even spiritually. Your entire interiority is expanded because then you're freer. Once this imitative expressions, I don't to see ikasebe, because you are simply trying to work outside self. And it can always be an awkward experience. But I've seen the joy of working from inside out.
Like I said, I expected this masterclass. We thank you indeed.
No, it's been a fantastic experience.